Okay, well, news has just broken from Tel Aviv. The outgoing Prime Minister, Edward Olmert, has announced to the world that operations in Gaza will cease as of midnight GMT. Mr. Olmert is claiming a successful victory over Hamas. However, the rockets are still coming, and the Israeli Defense Force have not been able to stop all of the rockets. This time last week, Ms. Livni said that the goal of the Israeli incursion into Gaza was to stop all rockets, and they would continue on in this campaign until all the rockets ceased. What is interesting is for the last 24 hours or so, Ms. Livni has been in Washington DC meeting Condoleezza Rice and having many bilateral meetings with her. Mr. Obama, of course, comes in on Tuesday, and he will be the 44th American president. It's unclear at the moment whether the Democratic administration, soon to take power, are going to be as pro and supportive to Israel as the Bush administration have been. Yet Mr. Bush was the architect of the Middle East Peace Quartet, an organisation which put a lot of pressure on little old Israel to give up more of her divine land to her Palestinian neighbours. And as we've said before, there are no Palestinians as such. The Islamic neighbours around Israel's border are primarily refugees. Mr. Arafat was a bisexual Egyptian, and Israel, although she is far from perfect, and even in biblical times she was called the least of all the nations, is nonetheless a democratic sovereign nation. Biblically speaking, the Jews are and remain the chosen people of God. All of the Old Testament men who wrote the Old Testament, the Jewish Tanakh, were Jews. The Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus, was a Jew, and all of the New Testament writers were Jews, including Dr. Luke, I believe. The Jews are very special in the eyes of the Lord, and every Bible-believing Christian also has an affection, a love for the Jewish people. It is tragic when Christian ministries and ministers become anti-Jewish and try to blame the Jews for every problem in the world. It is possible that there may be some truth in the fact that certain organisations, secret groups, may have been founded by Jews. That's possible. But we cannot and we will not blame every problem, every evil in the world on the Jews. That, of course, is a satanic lie, and if you were to apply that to any other organisation, you'd be called a racist. Hamas have been very clever using human shields over the last 3 weeks, and as usual the press in the West have failed to report this. Footage from Israeli F-16s have shown the dilemma of their pilots as to return fire from built-up areas or to leave it. As we said before, when Britain was fighting the IRA, she had one hand behind her back and was unable to bomb Dublin. When the Americans were fighting the Viet Cong, they could have used chemical weapons or even nuclear weapons. And if you've ever seen a clip of the film Nixon, made by Oliver Stone, there was a clip in the film when Anthony Hopkins, who plays Richard Nixon, screams at one of his advisors, I think it was Kissinger, and he threatens to drop the big one, as he calls it. He wasn't able to do that, because had he done that, it would have brought China and Russia perhaps into this conflict, and thankfully that was avoided. But America had one hand behind her back, as did the Soviets in Afghanistan when they were up against the Mujahideen. Israel in many ways has fought an old-fashioned war, like you read in the Old Testament, but even in the 21st century she is still limited by public opinion, and in many ways Israel unfortunately has lost the PR war. Israel has a very poor image around the world. and it seems for the most part that doesn't really concern her. But she hasn't won this conflict, as far as I can see. As far as I'm concerned, Israel has not beaten Hamas. Israel did not beat the Hezbollah from Lebanon, and since 2006 Mr. Olmert has been a wounded and a very weak and poor Prime Minister, and that is one of the reasons why he won't be standing in next month's elections. How much this conflict was down to Israeli internal politics, well, that we don't know. But what we do know is, once again, Israel has been chastised by her Lord, the God of Israel, Yahweh, and the Jews will continue to be chastised by the Lord. This is very much a paradox which the unsaved secular world know nothing about. We can see very clearly from the Bible that Satan, for example, told David to number Israel, and in another part of Scripture we find the Lord telling David to number Israel. Sometimes the devil and God work very closely together to bring about the Lord's ultimate purpose. Satan, of course, wants to destroy Israel, whereas the Lord wants to preserve Israel, and eventually, in the tribulation, we will see 1/3 of Israel be saved, which sadly means 2/3 won't be saved. But today this announcement has come across that Israel has won against Hamas, and this won't last. There will never be any peace in the Middle East, because the Jews have continuously rejected their Messiah. They rejected their Old Testament prophets, and they are currently living under God's judgment. And it is down to every Bible-believing premillennial Christian to pray for Israel, to stand with Israel from a divine point of view as far as the land is concerned. As we said before, there is a lot of corruption in Israeli politics, and that is why you and any other Bible-believing Christian should not be in any political system. The book of Galatians says that the bondwoman is to be cast out of the land, which of course is a picture of the Muslim, and some Christians don't like to be too political when it comes to this issue. However, Paul says quite clearly that in Isaac would the seed be blessed, and only through Isaac, and of course ultimately up to Jesus Christ, is the land and the covenant upheld. So keep watching, keep your eyes on Jerusalem. This is far from over, and anybody who thinks they can split the land up, anybody who thinks there's going to be a lasting peace, is in for a very large disappointment. It's also worth noting that Mr. Sharon was involved with the so-called peace process, and he was struck down with a very deadly illness, still alive but living on a life support machine. And Mr. Olmert was also diagnosed with prostate cancer. So Israel is a very sacred part of the world, but at the same time a very dangerous part of the world when it comes to messing around with God's part of the earth. So keep your eyes on Jerusalem, keep praying for the men and women of Israel, and don't forget the Christians living in the Palestinian areas, quote unquote. They do suffer. They are many times a forgotten people, and it's down to every Bible-believing Christian to be supportive of all of these organisations, and don't fall for any of this political claptrap of victory and we've achieved our goals, because they haven't. We know that with the new administration coming in, perhaps things are going to change. We'll have to wait and see. But either way, keep praying and keep looking up.